Listening, multiple choice, single answer, guided practice. Question number 1 for you.
Crashing is based on Holmes' life when he was just getting started as a comic. Like the character Pete in the series, Pete Holmes comes from a Christian background, married young, and divorced a few years later after he discovered his wife was having an affair. The series starts with that discovery. Since Pete's wife has been paying the bills and he's not yet making any money as a comic, when the marriage ends, he's basically homeless and has to crash in the homes of other comics like Artie Lang, T.J. Miller, and Sarah Silverman, who guest star as themselves in the series. The series is also a fish-out-of-water story, following Pete with his Christian background and upbeat disposition, trying to find his place in a comedy world where cynicism, neurosis, depression, sex, and drugs are the norm.
Correct option number 2. So now this is an important question because all the other 3 things that they both divorced at an early age, not making much money, living in the homes of other comedians, that's clearly mentioned as a similarity between Pete Holmes and the character in the series. But the second option, so they do talk about that he's trying to make his way in comedy, but doesn't clearly say that he ended up being successful or being very successful. So don't just make an assumption because that they're talking about his career and what he was trying to do in comedy, that ultimately it led to success. Some of you might already know this comedian and you might even have watched the series. In that case, do not jump to the conclusion based upon your understanding because it does end up being very successful, but that's not mentioned in the audio. So limit your decision to only the information that is clearly mentioned in the audio. And that is option number 2. So that's not a similarity based on the audio. Though, of course, in real life, if Pete Holmes, that he achieves quite a bit of success in comedy. Question number 2.
You know, I was in the Netherlands on March 31st. Their tax day is April 1st. Talking to a manager. He makes about $200,000 a year. He has a whole panoply of investments, 2 kids in private schools, 2 mortgages. He'd have to fill out 12 forms in the United States. And I said, Michael, how do you do your taxes? They're due tomorrow. He says, well, I pop a beer, I go online and see if the government's got the numbers right. And if they do, I hit a button, takes 5 minutes. He says, but, sometimes I start checking the numbers. He says, you start checking the numbers. It can take almost half an hour just to pay your taxes. He was outraged.
Wow.
The question, because the first thing that we do, the first step is to read the question. So what can you say about Netherlands tax filing system? That based upon the audio, what is correct about Netherlands tax filing system? So each of these 4 statements, they are supposed to be something about the Netherlands tax filing system. We have to pick the one which is correct. The correct option is option number 3. It has special provisions for those making over $200,000. $200,000 is mentioned in the audio, but it says an example when he talks of a person who knows and who tells him, the speaker, how he files taxes in Netherlands. So it's just that his income of around $200,000 is mentioned, but doesn't mean, or it's not mentioned that there are any special provisions or special things for those who make more than $200,000. Second, it allows taxes to be filed only online. Now it says that you go online and you check and you hit submit, but it doesn't mean that that is the only option. Maybe there are other options, so we can make that assumption based on the audio. It is much simpler than the US tax filing system. Yes, that is clear because the way the speaker, he compares and he describes, it hints at it is much simpler than their own tax filing system. Third, it is entirely automated and people don't need to do anything. Now, he also mentions that he goes and just sees if the government has already filled in. That means it is entirely automated. The calculations have been done and they just need to go and submit the form. So people don't need to do anything in Netherlands tax filing system. So that's why only option number 3 is correct. Let's look at the next question now.
The buzzword here is globalization. All our economies are tied, and the subprime mortgage crisis obviously was something that was an international issue, and essentially through globalization we're all tied and connected together, and we're connected together in the common issue of debt. It's essentially all about strengthening the banks and strengthening the European stability funds in order to avert potential future crises like the ones we've seen. And that really is where a lot of the discussion and the debate domestically within individual countries is centred on right now. For example, Germany. And really it is a question of political will versus the reaction of the markets, and whether the markets agree with what the governments finally decide to come up with.
The question here, it's important to understand the question. What is the core mechanism that is being looked into to avert another financial crisis? So you can guess that the talk is going to be about global financial crisis and what are the things that are being done or that are being thought of to prevent another such crisis from happening. The only clear mention is strengthening of the banking system and other systems. So that's why that is the correct option. The other things, they have been mentioned, but again, those words are mentioned in different contexts. So different countries have been mentioned, globalization, debt, all of the things are mentioned, but they're mentioned in different contexts. Only strengthening the banking system has been clearly mentioned as a way of preventing another financial crisis. Let's look at the final question of this practice session.
Scandinavia. Look at this Arctic wonderland. Fjords, saunas, fjords, lutefisk, blondes, Vikings, blonde Vikings, fjords, IKEA, babies in government-issued boxes, Santa, death metal, and fjords. But where exactly are the borders of Scandinavia? Because not all of this stuff is in it. Scandinavia is just 3 countries exactly: Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. 3 kingdoms to be more precise, all of which are on the Scandinavian peninsula, well, except Denmark, and plus Finland? Wait, this doesn't help at all, forget that. The 3 countries on this peninsula can be collectively called Fennoscandia, but if you do, everyone will look at you weird because no one except the nerdiest of geography nerds uses that word. Fennoscandia. So Scandinavia is a term that's 1 part geography, 1 part history, and 1 part linguistics, which is why people will argue about who exactly is included. Finland is normally excluded because she used to be considered one of the Baltic sisters with historical ties to Mother Russia.
All right, the correct option here is the last one. Now, this final question, I'll leave this to you as an exercise. The first thing, have you got this option correct? If yes, then very good. Then all you have to do is now clearly write the reason for why you picked this option and what's wrong with the other 3 options. However, if you were not able to get this correct, then have a look at your notes. I mean, did your notes clearly support this option? If not, then there was something lacking in what you remembered, what you understood, or what you wrote down in your notes. So then I want you to go back and listen, and in your notes, capture all the points that will support option number 4, all right? Because the key to getting these multiple choice questions, getting them correct, is understanding. So if you have to practice listening again, forcing your mind in the right direction, even if you have seen the option, right? Now you know what you should be listening to. So that's another way to practice. But make sure that your note taking is correct.